Now, the Commission for the Rights of Cultural, Religious and Linguistic Communities says that the deaths of 22 initiates could have been prevented had stakeholders adhered to its recommendations and guidelines. Now, the Commission has also suspended several initiation schools and practice for a year, and all affected areas in this instance are in the Eastern Cape. The boys who died since the beginning of the summer season, that toll now stands at 22, and the Commission held a media briefing in Johannesburg yesterday. So to tell us more about that, we're joined by the chairperson of the CRL Rights Commission, Professor David Mosoma. Thanks so much for your time this morning.
Thank you so much.
Let's just start here, Professor. What is your jurisdiction over a matter like this?
Our jurisdiction lies in our mandate. Our mandate is to protect and promote the rights of cultural, religious and linguistic communities. In other words, we protect the rights of communities, not of individuals. So in this instance, when young people go to initiation schools, it's part of the communities enjoying their culture in terms of Section 31 of the Constitution, where it says persons belonging to cultural, religious and linguistic communities may not be denied the right to enjoy their culture. So the challenge here is that as they enjoy their culture, they die in these institutions. So our take is that culture should not be an instrument of death. When young people go there, in terms of the initiation schools requirement, is that they're going to learn value systems that must sustain communities. For example, the concept of Ubuntu is the primacy of the other's life. I'm defined by who you are because we are inextricably connected together. So this is the problem we have, where the human life seems to be cheapened and the young people go and die in this. And of course, they blame culture. And we are saying culture is not to be blamed. Let's blame individuals who are criminalizing the culture, who are commercializing the culture, who are to some extent abusing the culture. So our call to suspend schools where deaths had occurred is to emphasize that such schools should not exist. Only schools where young people go and come back alive should be supported and promoted.
So you've identified 15 schools, if I'm correct in this regard, to be shut down.
In fact, we have not identified schools. We had simply said where death occurred. In other words, it's identified in terms of people on the ground. If that school, young people died, that school must be shut down and young people must be moved to the next school where they can be safe.
So there are 15 schools in this regard where deaths have occurred.
Which means those 15 schools must be shut down.
The Eastern Cape Traditional Affairs MEC expressed shock at this decision by the CRL. So did you have an opportunity to speak to them, engage with them in terms of what needs to happen?
Unfortunately not. That we did not have the time to do that because of the emergency of the situation, the escalation of the deaths in that environment. In fact, this is not the first time. Last year we had almost 17, this time around 22, and this cannot be allowed to continue. It's not a question of conversation. It's what we do to stop this carnage, because we are actually opening up ourselves to people who are criticizing, saying this culture, it's backward, it should be done away with. And yet our responsibility is protect and promote the rights of these cultures so that individuals must enjoy them and find solace in them.
One of the unfortunate things here is that these initiation deaths occur every year. And every year there are, a number of fatalities, unfortunately. But you have done some public hearings around this, and you've compiled a report in that regard. What came out of that?
Well, in the report, we outlined what are the things that needs to be done to obviate a situation such as this. First is to make sure that initiating schools find support from municipalities, that areas must be identified, set aside for this, and that those areas must be accessible, that the surgeons or nurses must be trained, that young people, before they go to the initiation schools, must be seen by a doctor, must be checked up, and the support of the parents is very, very invaluable here, that parents must be consulted, and the young people should not be abducted to these particular schools. So we laid a number of objectives which we felt would obviate this particular situation.
So we generally tend to focus on the deaths at these initiation schools, but there are, of course, also genital amputations and injuries that we don't necessarily put in the spotlight much. Did your report actually find anything in that regard?
Yes, we did. And we indicated that part of this is because of untrained surgeons who actually are themselves young people. Because of commercialization, they take young people, of course, a 16-year-old, circumcising 16-year-olds. And that situation is actually rampant in some places, which happens in illegal schools. And we have found this to be part of the problem, where young people lose their manhood as a result of this. And in fact, when we talk about death, it's not only dying where you actually get buried. You can die because you no longer have that stature of being a man. So you die twice, in essence, in this particular environment. So I'm not so sure why is the MEC surprised, because the MEC should be welcoming the support we are giving the province to get rid of this situation.
In terms of the amputees and the injuries, how dire is that situation?
Well, in some instances, it's very, very dire. And of course, we had a meeting with some physicians from the University of Stellenbosch who are trying to piece together, in some instances, some of the young people to recover their manhood. So they're doing a sterling job at the University of Pretoria. But it depends at what point they discover this. So that some of them die through gangrene, which gets developed because of botched circumcision, and so forth and so forth.
So what is the way forward? The
way forward is what we have suggested. Where there is death, that school must be closed.
Indefinitely?
Indefinitely, subject to compliance. We are prepared to negotiate, to look at the issue of compliance. Once the school complies with all the objectives we have set out, including the Eastern Cape Male Initiation Act itself, that is what we require.
So with regard to these schools that are going to be closed now, again speaking to your power, so as we sit here right now, they are closed?
I'm not so sure about that, because it's dependent on, one, we don't go on the ground ourselves. We deal with the NPA, we deal with SAPS, we deal with the traditional leaders, we deal with the Department of Health, we deal with the social development. All of these are the collaborative team that work together as part of our oversight as a commission.
But who would be physically responsible for going to the school and making sure that it is shut down?
It means today we're communicating with the SAPS.
So it would be the SAPS?
The SAPS must do that.
And what about the repercussions for these deaths? Is anybody held accountable? How does that work?
In fact, we have indicated that those that have caused these deaths must be arrested, and the law must take its course on all instances. This is tantamount to murder. So we are saying the law must take its course.
When you're saying it's tantamount to murder, that is very strong, and so many young men have lost their lives over the years. Has anybody ever been held accountable? Has anybody been arrested and sentenced for the death of any initiate?
There are few instances where people have been arrested and held to account, but there are many instances where that has not happened. So we are saying across the board, this must happen. This is the only way we can get rid of this situation. Because it doesn't matter. You can have as many policies as you can. You can have as many acts as you can. Unless there's oversight, enforcement, you will never get rid of some of these problems.
Well, thank you so much. That was chairperson of the CRL Rights Commission, Professor David Mosoma, talking to us about the death of 22 initiates in the Eastern Cape. And it's news time now with Leanne.